So, the difference between naturalism and idealism is perhaps that naturalism is how it is and idealism is how it should be. So, that way we make some correction to the natural norms when it is not up to the definition of beauty of that particular time or that particular concept and also to that particular context. Then we have a tendency to make it ideal, make it understandable to a common view. At the same time, unless we know the norms of the idealism, it is also not possible for us to understand that if we say that how it should be, then how it is actually happening. So, let us see how the rules have changed into different cultures. If we take examples from different tradition, we see that there are rules set in different traditions, different cultures and different points of times. For example, if we pick up the rules that was set for the Egyptian artist that made the Egyptian art itself unchanged for over 500 years of time, that for 500 years, almost 500 years, the artists they have worked throughout, but there had been hardly any change that was evident. Fine, it went on for all those 500 years unchanged. Only there was a small period of time when maybe the Akhenaten as a ruler who took over, and then he allowed the artist to conform to naturalism. So, he wanted his portrait to be made in a particular manner which is close to naturalism. So, it was all idealized for all those years. Except for a small period when Akhenaten was the ruler and the patron, and again it was taken over by Tutankhamen, and things have changed and went back to its earlier rule. So, rule is like that, rule is fixed, and then if you are following the rule, that then the norm will be continued for a very long time. Similarly, we have this 6 canons in Chinese art. 6 canons are 6 points that has to be compulsorily followed in traditional Chinese art. We have 6 limbs in Indian art. They are limbs, they are like the parts, and that gives you the sense of a whole. So, they are the compulsory rule to be followed in different traditions. So, let us just see how they work in the tradition. So, there are rules that are set up to basically maintain a standard. So, what we have is like we maintain a standardized proportion that is common for a particular tradition and also a particular time period. So, there are attempts by Leonardo da Vinci. We have seen that in the Vitruvian Man, what was set by Leonardo da Vinci, where he showed that navel is the center of the whole body. So, if we put navel at the center, we feel that it is going in a circular order. And it is also very interesting to see that unlike the Greek idealism, Leonardo da Vinci's proportion conformed to his individual experience. So, in fact, individual experience can also be standardized, and that was Vitruvian Man is a very good example of that. So, there are popular ratios which are like the standard proportions. One of them is like the most popular one is perhaps the golden ratio, where we just have a line, maybe if this is the length of the line, then we make a section, we divided it into 2 segments, where the first segment will be in the same ratio to the second, and the second one will be into the same ratio to the whole. So, it is again the part whole relationship that is operated, and for golden ratio there are fixed formulas. So, you can mathematically solve the equation and get a good result. So, those things are possible, and we feel that if you are following the golden ratio, that fits to our natural sense of beauty. So, what we know beautiful can be achieved through a golden ratio, or wherever the golden ratio is followed in nature, we find it to be very beautiful. Or perhaps just because nature is following golden ratio everywhere, we find nature to be beautiful. We never say that this part of nature is ugly. So, our appreciation for nature is calculated through a golden ratio, and we justify, we know why we like nature. So, these are there in front of us, they are scientific and they are also put that way. So, however, the modular ratio of Le Corbusier is another ratio where there is another example of a standardized proportion. So, proportion can be standardized and changed in different particular time, and we can also set a new standard and ask a group of people to follow that and set it up that way. So, anyway, let us also discuss and use Egyptian iconographic rules as one of the example. So, I will just read out some of the norms from the Egyptian canons or Egyptian rules of painting in the following slide. So, canons for paintings in traditional Egypt were fixed, were meant to be painted with darker skin color than women, pharaohs and queens to be always thin, beautiful and young, face and profile with a frontal eye, regular proportions in the body measures, the body to be 4 shoulders long, men's shoulders to be 6 fists wide, women's shoulder to be 5 fists wide, frontal view of shoulders, the navel to either edge, side view of the middle half of the body, fit in profile on toes. So, let us also get an overview how Indian art has also dealt with their compulsory proportions and also some norms of simile that had been instrumental to establish iconographic identity of a particular character. So, things were highly standardized, at the same time the knowledge was spreaded, so that it also initiates a very common and effective communication. So, in Indian art, murti or image of an idol, that is known as murti, they followed certain norms. So, the nara or the human being had a 10 point was known as tala, and tala is also measured through certain norms. That is, one tala is like if we take one finger, it is like a human hand, a folded human hand is first divided into 4 halves. One part of it is known as one finger, that is 1 unit. This is as big as one part of a finger. So, that is standardized as 1 unit. Now, 1 point or what is like 1 tala for measuring a mana, that is measurement. So, 1 tala is 12 times larger than 1 finger. So, if we have 1 unit, that is 1 finger, basically 1/4 of a finger, then 1 unit into 12 will give us 1 tala. So, when we see the Indian sculptures that are carved out in stone and placed in different places, they followed the similar unit in the measurement. So, all the human figures will have a measurement that follows a 10 tala or 10 point, whereas Krura or the grotesque images, that will have a 12 point, which is slightly bigger than the human figures. Then we have the Asura or the demons. So, the demons are of 16 points or 16 tala. Then we have the character which are like Bala. Bala is the boy, or the toddlers, they are young people. So, all the young people will have 5 points, and there is another category who are actually not children or young, but they have a younger look, like the female figures who are delicate, or maybe the dwarfish figures which are not as big as a human being. At the same time, they are also not children. So, they followed a 6-point ratio. So, these are the basic measurements, and I will give you some examples from Indian mythology, that this Nara will have figures like Rama, Arjuna, there can be Indra, who are the king of gods. We have Bhargava. There are characters like Nrisingha, who is an incarnation. Then there are Bali, and so on and so forth. Now, for the Krura, we have images which are ferocious, they are grotesque images. So, we have characters like Chandi, Bhairav, Narasingha, we have Hayagriva, where it is a combination of a human being and an animal form. So, this kind of grotesque images are following another point, which is in between the demon and the human forms. Now, the demon form or the Asura follow a proportion, and some of the examples may be Ravana, Kumbhakarna, Mahishasur, and so on. We also have characters like the young Krishna, Gopala, or the Krishna's childhood in this proportion, that is 5 points. And for the Kumara, we can have Uma, we have Vaman, and also the friends of Krishna, who follow the 6-point proportion. So, that is how it works. Now, seen in the picture is one proportional norm that is followed in Indian art, and we call it as, I have just made one part of it to give you the understanding of how it works. So, we can see that this part is used as one unit, and the unit got repeated like this: 1, 2 where the chest comes, then 3 the navel, and also the elbow, 4 is a base. So, in a sitting figure, the upper part will have 4 units, then 5.5 or 6 will be the knee, and then 6.5 or 7, depending on the figure, how tall the figure is, 7 and 7.5. That is a standard proportion that is known in Indian art as Uttam Navatala. Uttam means good. So, Uttama is good. So, that is known as ideal. So, the ideal measurement. We also get to see in the picture another standardized norm where there are simile or similitude that is used in pictures. So, what we get to see here that there are iconic representation of human limbs. So, they do not look natural at all. So, they are not natural, but they are done with natural references. So, when we see an eye like this, it also resembles another form that is taken from nature. So, what we see here is ideal, and the reference is from nature. So, we use a natural reference to categorize an ideal form. So, the inspiration for this particular eye is a lotus. So, this is known as the Padmalochana or the lotus eyed one. We have another eye that looks different. So, we have the eye in a shape that is more like the shape of a bird who is like more turbulent. So, it is an eye which is not as stable as a lotus eyed one. So, when we see an eye like that, it gives us a sense of a young girl who is not as calm as the earlier ones. So, we see this kind of eye which is half closed. We have a lot of Gandhara sculptures following the similar half closed eyes, that is more meditative and calm, whereas an eye which is like a small bird, it is not as calm. So, we see that in young women, princesses, there are young goddesses who have this kind of eye which is more unstable. We also see reference like this which is known as Minakshi. So, Min is a fish. So, a fish like eye will name the woman, or they'll be iconic. This is just an iconic representation. So, iconographically they will be recognized as the Minakshi, or the one who has an eye that resembles a fish. There are similar examples. I will draw a few. One is like when you make the eyebrow that resembles a leaf. So, you have the structure of a forehead that has a leaf like formation. So, when you see the lemon like eyebrow, that is another example that you have a third eye in between. So, you convert the leaf into two eyes from a natural inspiration to deriving idealized form. There are other things also, like there are lips that are found in Indian sculpture, and they often have a formation like this, which is idealized, and that has a resemblance with another form that is also found in nature. So, that is perhaps a formation of a bud, of a flower. And there are also other icons. So, if we have a lip like this, that can also resemble another form. So, there can be also a nose that may resemble a flower, or a chin that resembles a kidney bean, or perhaps a torso that resembles a cow's head. Or a torso. To resemble a lion's body. There can be a waist, the shape of the waist, the mid part of the body, especially in female figures, that may resemble a musical instrument that is found in the hand of Shiva, that is known as Damaru. So, there are n number of possibilities to take natural reference and put them as inspiration in a standardized or ideal norm. Let us also get familiar with some of the similar things where the nose looks like a parrot's beak, or the ear looks like a particular bird, the nose in the form of a particular flower, the shoulder in the form of a elephant trunk. There are also arms in the form of a banana tree, where it unfolds into the fingers. We have different categories of pods and bends that follow the human hand. So, there are lotus and the hand resembles the lotus form. So, everything is derived from the natural forms, but they are getting a new form. So, this is one gesture, a posture that has a particular standardized bend. So, a particular figure can either stand in a position that is known as Samabhanga, where things are balanced in a position and both the legs are distributed in equal distance from the center. So, the central balance of the figure is lying here at the top of the spine to this part, where the whole body balance is in 90 degree, which is perpendicular to the ground. There are other postures that are found in Indian sculptures following the same standardized norm. So, when we see a figure that is known as a Tribhanga gesture, Tribhanga is where the body is bent 3 times. So, we have this bend that is taking place only 3 times in the body. If this is the vertical line, then there are 3 breaks in the same full body. Abhanga is another form where the body is just a bit bended, not much. Now, this is another example of a female body Tribhanga that is taking place. So, again we can see that the body is bent in a Z-like formation. So, there are 3 points, and this is Atibhanga, where the body is bending several times in several orders. So, more than 3 or 4 and many. So, this is Atibhanga or multiple bend. So, there are also certain norms which are compulsory in Indian iconography. They are very similar to the Western or maybe the Egyptian norms, that whenever you are making a figure who is otherwise like either a god or a superhuman, maybe some incarnation or some figure of some mythological importance, in their figure the artist is not actually free to do things of their choice. So, every time they are making a figure like that, they need to make sure that the figure looks young, and they cannot be too young or too old, and they should be healthy and rigorous. So, it's like that life force has to be added, which is again very subjective. You cannot idealize the rigor that they want to produce in the human form that makes them lifelike. So, you cannot actually make it a compulsory rule or provide a few elements to make some lifelike image. We can also like when we say that what is beautiful, we have certain notions that it should not look dead. A dead expression is nothing that we accept in a visual representation. So, it has to be lively. And then the norms of naturalism and idealism talks about a different thing which is also related to it, that whether we are copying the life or we are recreating the life. So, if we want to maintain the liveliness in a picture, whether we are following the nature as they are without any interpretation, without any artistic distortion, which is like simplification or exaggeration, we represent things as we see. So, there we move in a certain direction, we do not interpret and we just represent. We see, we produce and we represent. So, that is the mode of communication that does not permit us to think much or simplify. And then there are also norms where we standardize, we simplify, we exaggerate. We also take some natural resemblance and then try to produce something that follows some natural principle, natural idea, but it does not look natural at all. So, we are provided with a lot of freedom. Now, the basic criteria, maybe the compulsory rule is that it should reproduce the life that is there in nature. So, even in a standardization, there are norms where they are saying that it should look as if it is breathing. So, it should not look static and dead. So, in a static formation, in a two-dimensional painting or a sculpture, we need to keep in mind that though it is still, though it does not have a physical life, but what we do is we add life to it by natural formation or maybe by idealization. That freedom is given provided we produce a lifelike image, we produce a lot of life in the image that we are creating there.